Hi guys, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you are listening to this, and welcome back to another episode of Don't Fear the Weight with me, your host, the Tiny Titan, Vicky Masita. And in the hot seat, I have got a returning guest because the very first episode that we did together went down a storm, and I know that you really appreciated his knowledge. I, for one, am probably a little bit of a girl fan, but I'm not going to say that too loud because otherwise his head might become too big to fit in the screen. But Mr. Luke Miller from No Switch Off Fitness, because nobody switches off with him, is back with me. Hey, Luke, how are you?
Good. I might be able to get some thoughts across with a little bit less pauses today. Got the juices flowing again with some food. So I'm excited for today's episode, a topic I'm very passionate about and think that needs to be discussed more. So I'm really looking forward to diving in.
Definitely. So for guys who haven't seen the YouTube video previously, Luke had an insane diet face the last time that we had in. He was pretty skeletal going on 100 grams of carbs and had to carry on kind of like rethinking his thought processes, but still did an amazing job in getting the knowledge bombs out there. So now I'm going to be blown away by all of his knowledge because he has more of a, well, not quite a moon face yet, but more of like a little bit of a donut face, I suppose, with some more character and no pauses, because you stopped prep, right?
Yeah, so my wife ended up missing her pro card by a single spot at the first national show. And a couple days after, she decided she was going to extend her prep to USA's, which was another 3.5, 4 weeks. And that ended up landing about 6 days out of the show I was planning to do. And just with the contest calendar the way it is, that was, and how many people I have competing this year, that was the only weekend I had available to compete. And with her wanting to try to win her pro card that weekend and me being 6 days out, I decided that that was not the best state to try to peak her in, as far as like mentally being able to be there and just being present. And so I saw what I needed to see this year. I was like condition wise, probably about 2.5 weeks out by the time we went to Universe. And it was a very good package. I was about 17 pounds heavier than the last time I stood on stage. As far as like the same condition spot relative to the last showing, which is good, but to be like a first call out national competitor, I still got another like 12 pounds probably to put on. So it not too disappointing because I wanted to not compete until I was like competing at the high level national stage, like the regional's nice, but it's time to move on from that. So for me, it was more prioritization of the athletes whose time is now.
Yeah.
And so that was a pretty easy decision for me because my athletes a lot of times come first. And then, so that was that decision made. And we're now like a week out from USA's, and Emily has decided to kind of put that on pause just because of the psychological side. It's been like 38 weeks of prep for her. So she's a bit knackered to say the least. So,
Prep.
But so she's going to put it on pause and just come back and shut the door the next time, either next year or the year after. So work to do for both of us, but we've never been afraid of the work. So that's the good thing.
Absolutely. And how's Emily feeling now in terms of her fatigue management and managing to obviously, I mean, I know that she had a couple of off-plan meals before she dove back into some prep, but how's she feeling about the decision now?
Well, she prepped long enough between shows to really clear that weight. So she kind of got back down to the universe weight pretty fast. And then when she made the decision not to, there was 1 or 2 meals within that first week. I think the fatigue management side is going extremely well. I think the post-show blue side might not be going so well, because it's the first time she's been down to being that lean, right? And so she starting to get a little bit of that fluid back, and training performance is going well and things like that. And so like the subjective day-to-day feelings are going great, but it's like visually, you start seeing that condition start to slide, and you really got to drive like getting back into that good hormonal environment and getting back to productive training. And that's kind of hard to see, especially on the female side. It typically goes a little bit faster than the male side, just out of necessity. So Really kind of trying to find the psychological place to be with that, but she's doing good. Her training sessions are going well, so that's really all we can ask for.
Yeah, that's really good. Well, I do wish her well. I know that she'll probably listen to this because, you know, obviously she's going to listen to you talk about it. So I do wish her well. So, Emily, I think you've done an amazing job personally. And I think one thing that really makes Emily stand out from my perspective is her shape, because her shape is like incredible. I mean, you can see some girls who can get some real good condition, but to have that shape naturally is, you don't see that very often.
Yeah, she's got all the tissue in the world. It's just nailing it. That's going to be the big thing. I think she'll be much better at the whole prep process and handling it personally next time, because this honestly, like, she's competed before, but the person who prepped her didn't really get her anywhere close to being stage ready. So this is honestly the first time that she was in stage condition. So it was a new experience, but she fucking took it like a champ and handled it great. I'm just excited to see where she goes from here.
Totally. So am I. Right. Okay. So let's dive into today's subject. Now, today's subject, like you said, you're very passionate about, and we do think that it does need to be highlighted a little bit more in the industry. I want to look at it from a couple of perspectives, really. So the actual physiological element and chemical element of PEDs in athletes, and we can look at like men as well as females. But what I'd also like to look at is from a coach's perspective, because there's been a lot of things that I have seen recently, and I have heard from a lot of people recently from different coaches around the globe, that coaches are literally just prescribing certain things that don't necessarily make any sense. Yeah. And the athlete almost is afraid to question their coach because of their own lack of knowledge. So I'd like to get into that because I know that you're really passionate about the coach-client communication lines being really open, which I am 110% in agreement with. But let's first of all start off with PEDs. Why do athletes all of a sudden go from a natural perspective and then cross over to an assisted element from your mentality?
Yeah, so just some prerequisite information here because I have to say it. First off, I'm not a medical practitioner, so do take everything that I say with a grain of salt. You know, I love being an advocate for my clients, and we understand that this is involved within the sport of bodybuilding. And honestly, us being advocates for our clients, a lot of times we're more passionate about the overall long-term health than the actual medical practitioners. And if you're talking to the right person, have a better understanding of these PEDs and the usage of it within performance development and physique enhancement, right? So just a quick disclaimer, but to start, I think it always starts with prerequisite information and understanding where is the client coming from as far as why they want to use it. So if it's for competitive aspirations, then obviously it's a little bit more warranted than if it is within like, I don't want to say selfish aspirations, but more vain aspirations type of a thing. Not that PEDs can't be used in that sense, but it's just the conversation's different. And ultimately, at the end of the day, the conversation should always start with the coach taking time to walk through a basic understanding of male/female physiology, depending on what client you're dealing with, how that's going to alter base physiology, the positives that you'll get from it and the negatives. So the things that on both sides of the fence that could happen because you're dealing with a response to compounds. Yeah. And all response to compounds is very inter-individual. For people who may not know that term, it just basically means we have a base understanding of how these compounds work mechanistically, but the level at which someone responds to these compounds is very, very, very individual. So you can see side effects crop up at dosages that it doesn't with other people. You can see response as far as like adaptations to inclusions of PEDs be a lot larger with some people than others. And if you like compared it on a relative milligram dosage for milligram per milligram basis, like dosing for people, I don't think that we should always discuss things in a milligram per kilogram basis because of that inter-individual response.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that kind of lays the groundwork, right? There should be an expectation for the coach to understand base physiology. There should be, for both males and females, how the compounds affect that base physiology from a mechanistic standpoint. And then also walking through what a safer use model would look like with each person. So obviously that model flexes a little bit depending upon the goals and aspirations of the client, but taking the time to do that, right? Like it's ironic that we're having this podcast right now. I had to send a rather wordy voice note / Zoom or Bloom thingy, whatever,
Yeah.
to a client that typically I don't get involved, but I'm handling their training only, and they sent me a video from their check-ins from their coach that essentially said like, hey, like as a part of this company, we put all of our clients on Anavar as first line, and we expect you to do your own research. And I was like, ooh, there's so many wrong statements within that, just that one sentence, let alone the rest of the video that was kind of explaining why, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that we should have a higher expectation for coaches to sit down with the client, go through all the positives and negatives, all the health considerations, that there is not safe PED usage, and that needs to be made very, very clear. Like, you are taking health risks here. There may be safer use models, and there may be ways to combat these possible health outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
But there's nothing safe about PED usage. And that's not to scare people. It's just to understand the risks, right? And there's a lot of people within the industry who have gotten very good at managing the health markers of people. But there's also a lot of people who are doing some really shitty shit. And I use that word back to back because it's really bad.
Yeah.
Which is why I think that prerequisite, like, okay, let's sit down and have a conversation about this, should be expected from coach to client, because then the communication's clear and it allows them to make an informed decision, rather than a lot of times what ultimately is probably a pressure decision from peers, or they want to be at a spot in their careers where someone else is, and they think that this is the magical pill or the magical formula to getting to that spot into their career, talking from like a physique and development side.
Yeah.
So it's a very interesting topic, but I think it starts with the base understanding and the base conversation of, hey, like, this is what you get into. It's real. It's not just something to play with, so.
For sure. Absolutely. And I think exactly what you just said there, you open up a line of communication and a line of trust as well. Because if your coach has the time to sit down with you and actually say, right, listen, this is the case. This is what PEDs do. This is what you're getting yourself into. These are the possible side effects, symptoms, blah, blah, blah. And just the baseline understanding of how they actually work. Because a lot of people as well don't actually understand that most compounds, or all compounds, are still testosterone. And it's when I had a look at a certain protocol, and I'm like, okay, so you've got X, Y, and Z. These are all testosterones. Why are we taking all of these testosterones? And they're like, no, my testosterone is just this. I'm like, no, everything is a derivative of testosterone. This is what we're trying to explain. But it's just that basic understanding that they don't actually realize that that's what they're putting into their body. And if women are going to be taking these compounds, which again are a derivative of testosterone, and they're going up to say, like, I don't know, I'm just trying to bring something out of my arse here, but like 50 milligram a week or something like that, that's really high. And women are just, they don't understand it. They just go ahead and do it because coach told me to.
Which I think is kind of where the comment of mechanistically understanding the compounds comes from, right? Because then we can look at, okay, all of these are test derivatives or DHT derivatives of some sort. What does the downstream conversions of all these compounds look like? And then we can make more accurate, compound selection based on understanding that for male versus female, and for the outcomes that are supposed to be there. So like, it's fairly common. Like, on the male side, we always typically start with a test based, which we're okay with, because we're okay with that conversion from test into estradiol, the aromatization, and the DHT upregulation as well. And then on the female side, like, that's exactly what you want to avoid. So it's like, okay, so we from step one out the gate, we have something that's different, right? And it's just unfortunate because you see some protocols for females that are pretty early on in the process already suggesting test derivatives that do have those like conversion pathways, which we can get into in a little bit. But I think one of the big things you said there is trust too, because I think part of that initial consult should be the coach mapping out how health metrics are going to be tracked.
Yeah.
It's kind of typically part of that initial conversation I have with someone looking to jump from natural into enhanced. Is, hey, like, look, we have a blood work folder. We're going to track blood work over time. We have certain health metrics that we're going to track on like a weekly basis. So like, depending on the compounds at play, that changes, but stereotypically you hear blood pressure is the first one that comes up. Commonly blood glucose if there's a growth hormone involved, and things along those natures, right? And so I think knowing that those systems are in play in order to track health across time is important. And I think it's a aspect of that initial consult that should be discussed, because it's like, okay, not only does this guy know what he's talking about, he understands these things, and he wants to keep like a safe for use model or whatever variation of safe for use model you want to discuss at play, but he also wants to track the health metrics across time, because this is definitely a sport of a marathon and not a sprint for 98% of people that are involved. So and people often don't think about the life after bodybuilding, which I think is very, very, very not a good thing. They just want the here and now, right? But we do have to understand that, unfortunately, as much as we love this, there is a life after bodybuilding, right? So it's kind of our job to remind people of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we also need to remind people that there is life that accompanies bodybuilding as well. So even though we say, we are all in bodybuilding and we are all in no switch off and that kind of thing, you said it yourself in the very first podcast that we had, you have got to understand and differentiate when you are Coach Luke and when you are husband Luke. Yeah. And it is because that we do have separate elements of our life. We are not 110% bodybuilding all of the time. You have to have that external elements before you drive yourself fucking nuts. You know what I mean? But yeah, I totally agree with that side of things. That's awesome. Okay, so big question that I wanted to ask you before I get into any of the other ones that come in, because I think that this one is a really good thing to bring up, especially off the back of what you're talking about with coaches and different derivatives. Why should women not be treated like small versions of men when it comes to PEDs?
Base physiology. I mean, that's just the basic understanding of base physiology, right? And how that works for a female. Oh man, where do I start with this? All right, so here is like just kind of like expectations 101. So skipping the physiology lecture, the things you typically want to look out for. So obviously with female PED usage, and I'm just going to kind of gloss over the base physiology here.
Yeah.
We need to understand that obviously female HPA, so hypothalamus pituitary axis, is going to come in phases. So we have follicular phase, mid-cycle, luteal phase when we're looking at HPA. Hypothalamus is going to be always signaling anterior pituitary. Pituitary is going to be signaling the ovaries, right?
Yeah.
At each portion of the phase, we have a different signaling cascade that occurs according to the female's menstrual cycle. All right. So not going to dive too deep into that, just like set that base expectation there. So with that, it's typically going to be like estradiol, progesterone, creating the signaling cascade pathway from the ovaries. And this is where we see like the progesterone spike and all these kinds of things when we look at the chart that graphs like a menstrual cycle across a 28-day time period, right?
Yeah.
Just the stereotypical cycle. So furthermore, we have to understand that elevations of androgen profiles are going to lead to side effects. That's just like classic 101 female physiology usage. However, we're going to see worsening of those effects the closer to the testosterone derivative that we get. Yeah. So barring dosage parameters, because we use test and HRT protocols within females in order to get back to normal.
Yeah.
We can go down that route in a second, but essentially first line for females is going to be, if we're skipping the whole SARMs discussion and possibly the clenbuterol discussion within diet phases, because clenbuterol will have an anabolic effect for tissue retention and tissue promotion.
Yeah.
Assuming that it's not within the contest prep state, and that's an option there. We're typically looking at compounds that we would consider as DHT derivatives. So what is a DHT derivative is the next question. And DHT derivatives are going to be your masterons, your primos, your provirons, your things like that, right? It's why we commonly prescribe Anavar for people, is because with that, we're not seeing that conversion into estradiol, and we're not seeing that conversion into DHT. So people get kind of like bent out of shape when they say DHT derivative. Oh, I'm going to lose my hair. It's like, no, it's like, that's not how that works. And that's a conversation for a different podcast, but ultimately DHT is not the main driver of hair loss. We have to understand like people's individual capacity to maintain hair and lose hair and within that. So people don't take finasteride, please, just for your long-term brain and kidney health, but different conversation, different time. So back to females. So typically we're looking at minimum effective dose of these DHT-based compounds, okay? And that's typically first line with people. Now, the problem here is two of the most fake compounds on the black market are our first line usage compounds for females. So Anavar and Primo are typically the first two that come into conversation. Two of the most faked compounds out there.
Yeah.
Anavar's for God knows everything under the sun, but most commonly you'll see it like with a D-ball or something along those lines. And then typically with Primo, you see it faked as test.
Yes.
At the dosages that you're going to be taking Primo, that's the last thing I want to be putting into a female as far as at the equivalent milligram dosages, if we're going to like do it milligram per milligram basis, right?
Yeah.
So the hairy subject here with female PED usage is how real is the compounds that we're actually using? What is the timeline we're working on? What is the capacity of this female to pull labs if things start to go wrong? So that we can understand maybe, okay, we thought this was Primo, but it's not. And my lab work shows that it's not, right? And that's kind of like the balance game you start to play, and which is why that initial conversation, especially with the female, is important, because it's like, hey, like if you start seeing this, like you need to let me know, because we need to figure out why the fuck this is going on.
Yeah.
And so like stereotypical side effects you'll see is like the clitoral enlargement, hair growth, virilization typically is a later one. So you're typically wanting to be more aggressive on, you start seeing the other ones, let's consider pulling things out. But it's also going to depend on the rate at which that comes on, right?
Yeah.
Longer usage for contest prep cycles will result in some of these cropping up. Some females are not okay with that, right? So when it comes to first line PED usage with females, skipping the whole SARMs discussion with clenbuterol, which is typically where we would start with most females, is going to be either a Primo or an Anavar option at a minimum effective dose. And duration is the last piece of this. So duration is where a lot of females get themselves into trouble. It is where the most or the side effects that become permanent ultimately end up happening. And so when we look at cycle design for females, it's going to be get them in, be productive, get them out.
Yeah.
And then also too, like when we look at long-term progress over time, at some point dosages will maybe / probably want to go up, which is why a lot of guys in this realm lean towards Primo, because the negative health outcomes of elevating Anavar dosing is a lot larger than the negative health outcomes of Primo. And so that's kind of like baseline thought process. There's a lot of factors to consider within that. And then the last piece is like the possible loss of fertility, right? And that's a conversation you need to have with every female. So
Yeah. Definitely. In terms of the cycle length, because obviously the devil is in the dosage as well as in the duration. So in terms of cycle length for females, I don't know about yourself, which is the reason why we have this conversation. But I am a bigger fan of staying off cycle for almost longer than they are on cycle. So what are your thoughts on that? You're nodding very agreeingly, so I'm going to say that yes, you're agreeing with that
one. So with introduction of these compounds, a lot of times we see loss of menstrual cycle fairly quickly, right? So one of the things is, at minimum and at worst case scenario, because your timeline is pushing you to have to do this, a 1-to-1. So that's like 8 weeks on, 8 weeks off, or whatever that may be. The ideal conversation is that that's not the scenario you play. Just because, like, when we talk about bouncing back from compounds, you know, there's a longer period of time typically to see bounce back. I mean, shit, we have people that are extremely resilient, and I've seen females regain menstrual cycle 3 to 4 weeks post cycle, right? It happens, but that doesn't warrant them getting back on, even if labs check out. Because again, you said devil is in dosage and duration.
Yeah.
What you're doing there is you're actually extending the duration at which they're on compounds throughout the year by bringing the frequency in, right? It's the same fucking conversation as volume, right? You bring frequency up, volume goes up. Same thing with fucking drug use, right? It's not as simple as that, but point being is I am a very big advocate of taking a little bit more time than the cycle duration. So like, let's say someone does 10 weeks of primo. Typically that's going to look like at least 15-ish, 16-ish off, depending on metrics and lab work and stuff like that. Now, I know some coaches that are a little bit more of an advocate of shorter duration, higher dosage.
Yeah.
And higher dosage within the realms of the confines of normal dosing for a female, right? So let's not like go blast fucking 400 milligrams of primo, but that, so like more like they feel like, because, and that there's, I can see the utility in this argument is that most of the time duration is what gets females when it comes to the side effects, as long as the compounds are real. So they'll like get in, get out, and they'll take that time period off relative to the cycle dosage, and it just shortens the length between cycles essentially, because like if it's 6 weeks on, 12 weeks off, now you're just reintroducing on shorter cycles. 6 one way, half a dozen the other, but I'm typically a little bit more of a fan of minimum effective dose, do a slightly more normal duration, and then come off for restoration of lab work, menstrual cycle, you know, productivity within that. And a lot of times it gives you the capacity to go into the next cycle in such a better spot that you get more out of it anyways. So I think people miss the health metric side of productivity. And that's like one of the biggest things for being productive within a cycle for females. So I would agree with you there. I will say that there have been timelines where it's like, well, fuck, like I had to run a 1-to-1, but it's not my suggested or my ideal.
Yeah, I think a lot of people as well, and it's the same for men as well as women, but I think a lot of people forget how anabolic food is. So when they come off a cycle, for example, they automatically think that they're going to lose all of their gains. Like if they're going to be using for contest prep, for example, and then they come off, and then all of a sudden they want to have that rebound. They're like, yeah, but I want the anabolic rebound, you know, in this kind of thing. So I'm going to use all of the drugs. And it's like, why can't you have 2 rebounds?
Oh, okay. Yes. So let me kind of go here. So let me use myself for an example. So my anabolic elevation for my prep was very minimal. It wasn't in terms of a contest prep, it was probably laughingly low, but either way, food is a vector of progress. Okay. So when we think of physique development progress, we have to think in terms of vectors. So we can progress training as a vector. We can progress food as a vector. We can progress PEDs as a vector. And so the PED progression vector is not going to be as linear as like food and training, but it is a vector of progress. So coming out of my prep, I was really fucking lean.
Yeah.
It makes me very sensitive to food. I hadn't been on, I mean, I've been on for long duration, but very low dosage, which is another conversation within male PED usage, is like we can mitigate health risk with lower total anabolic androgenic load,
Mhm.
but duration can kind of be extended out, and we can see the bounce back between cycle and time off be a little bit shorter. But because that vector of food is so strong for me, as in I can drive a lot of progress just with the food increases that are coming back into play. I actually pulled back into TRT while I restore all of my performance metrics, all of like the niggles that I have from being really fucking bone dry lean. I have a lot of tissue that can be added within the vector of food alone.
Yep.
And I'm just maintaining a normal hormone environment within that. Now, what's going to happen is my sensitivity to food obviously is not going to be the same as coming out of a post show 5, 6, 7 weeks down the line. And then now, even though food won't be at the spot where it's like miserable to eat, we are no longer as sensitive to the food vector, so we can use the PED vector to now move progress continually further, right?
Yeah.
So we're now deploying things in a sequential manner in order to maintain rate of progress for a longer period of time.
Yeah.
And so tissue can only be laid down at a certain rate. And when you're that sensitive to food, taking the food vector to lay down that tissue at that rate when you probably got like 4 weeks before you feel like a fucking normal human again anyways, take the time to use food as a vector to restore almost homeostasis within training performance, recovery capacity, progression over time, and be able to use that food vector before you bring in that PED vector. And I think that that's like hugely missed. And then when you get into the conversation of all season, like using the food vector to not only retain the tissue built within a cycle, but continue to progress. Cause like physique, I mean, you can still build muscle even though you're not blasting. Like you just, the rate at which it's done is a little slower. So using that food vector is really important for long-term progress, in my opinion.
I totally agree. And this is, I've seen it so many times. Like people come out of a contest prep and they're just like, no, I'm going to stay on. I'm going to stay on for another 4 or 5 weeks and really take advantage of the anabolic window, the fact that my body's so receptive and I can build all of this new muscle tissue and that kind of thing. And especially again with females should not go on a cruise. So when females say to me, you know, oh, I'm going to cruise, it's like, no, you're not. You're either off or you're on, you know, I'm sorry. But unless you obviously want to go down the route of the hormone replacement therapy, which is obviously where you're going to be using testosterone therapy as well. I am one of these people because obviously I lost my cycle as a natural. So I am currently on 5 milligram of testosterone. Go on. I knew you wanted to interject there because I had the point.
Yeah, no, it's just the dose is the thing, right? It's like HRT protocols like between 3 and 7 milligrams. I can't tell you how many people have gone to a medical practitioner and come back with a 20 milligram testosterone HRT dose because they're just, females going to an HRT clinic and coming back with 20 to 25 milligrams of test a week.
Would they have the progesterone and the estrogen on top of that? They wouldn't. So they would just have the testosterone in the hope that it would be aromatized into estrogen. Wow. Holy fuck. Right. This really kind of like grinds my gears so much.
Negligence.
Yeah, complete negligence. Reason being, and I'll tell you the reason why, right, is because when I obviously went for mine and stuff, I had like fuck all hormones, like zero. I had less androgens than a postmenopausal female. So I literally had nothing. Now, you need some form of androgens and hormones for the testosterone to bind to in order to aromatize. If you are just putting in a synthetic testosterone, all you are doing is putting yourself into a super physiological level. So when I was first given my dosage, I was given my dosage at 6 milligram a week. Nothing happened. Bloods weren't doing anything. I wasn't feeling any different. You know, obviously I'm looking for signs of libido. I'm looking for signs of body composition change, all of these kind of things that you would typically experience with a bit of a higher testosterone level and hormones. Absolutely nothing. I basically was told to carry on titrating it up to like 10 milligram a week. Across two doses, right? Because I was given a cypionate base. So across two injections. Basically, I started suffering the side effects that you were talking about before. So clitoral enlargement, maybe a little bit, not realistically like a lot of body hair growth, but you could tell that it was growing a bit quicker than as opposed to obviously getting a full on 5 o'clock shadow. I didn't have that. Do you know what I mean? But it was just growing a little bit quicker than normal. So I just thought, you know what, this is just wrong. This is just wrong. So I went and go and had my bloods done privately. It came out that basically my testosterone was like way super physiological. Still had fuck all estrogen. No estrogen, no progesterone, nothing. And all I was getting is the side effects that you do not want to experience. I mean, some women like having a bigger clitoris. Me, not so much. I didn't prefer it. So I just titrated it back down. I was like, right, I'm just going to do that. I'd do that and then put in estrogen and progesterone at, I'm not going to tell the dosages, but I put in those at the same time. All of a sudden, I became alive, you know, and I had emotions again and I had libido again. And all of a sudden, I started packing on muscle tissue because guess what, women, you and men for this matter, you need estrogen in order to grow. If you do not have estrogen, you ain't going to grow very, very well. So I was busting my ass trying to grow tissue for as long as I could, well, for like 7 years. And I just could not put any of it in. All of a sudden I've got hormones. I'm like, ah, shit. I'm now a bodybuilder, which is exciting. But
it can drastically change the visual component too, right? Like I think that's what people won't realize, and I think we kind of touched on this with like rate of progress. Like it's just fucking crazy the rate of progress you can gain once that's restored. And I think that lab testing is really important in order just to kind of understand like where you're at and understand that, okay, so you know we're doing slight elevation with 5 milligrams a week. We're seeing that put me right at the top end of normal range. You know, we're using the estradiol cream to create typically what we would like to see in an all-season setting is like a 10-to-1 ratio of estradiol to progesterone.
Yeah.
Assuming that you pull labs between day 21 and 24 of menses, if that's still a thing. But typically like that 10-to-1 ratio and using that. And I'm assuming you're using like bioidentical cream and bioidentical oral progesterone as far as
I use both of them are orals. I don't use creams.
Okay, so typically the route of administration for the estradiol is going to be a bioidentical transdermal estradiol cream, and then the progesterone is going to be a bioidentical orally available. So typically that's best route of administration, just for overall health outcomes and limiting side effects and a couple other things with consideration of sleep fulfillment. But so that's typically the route that I suggest when we try to go down the HRT route. But it's interesting, like you can change people's lives with this shit. Like you don't realize how bad you feel and how bad like all these variables are until you have someone go through that experience of being there and then experiencing life on HRT. And holy fuck, it is a different ball game.
Honestly.
And you don't even need other compounds for elevation, right? Because you get so much productivity out of that. It's like, well, just gonna fucking ride this boat.
I know.
And it's like, it's crazy the amount of progress that you can have. And I've ran preps where it's just been the HRT protocol.
Yeah. And it's crazy. I mean, I've spoken about it on Instagram stories before, but I think it would be quite good to actually do like a full podcast on the experience of having like no hormones for 7 years and then actually with life on HRT, because I've only actually been on HRT since like January this year. And for 7 years, it's exactly like you just said. I had no idea how bad I felt until my hormones were regulated. And the only way that I can describe it is that I was wandering around the world existing. And I truly didn't have any kind of feeling towards my life at all.
Keep going. No, you're just fucking nailing the nail on the head. It's like a classic HRT case 101. It's like, and people are so scared of it, which fucking rightly so. If we have practitioners out here giving 20 to 25 milligram test doses a week for females, which then makes it hard, right? Because you got to go digging for a progressive practitioner who's willing to get, the test compounded for you, because like if you're administering at that low of a dose, you can't just buy black market tests because the concentrations are too high. Yeah, so it's a whole fucking like hoops to jump through, but it's so worth it, man. Like everybody who's done it has been just fucking fantastic. So
oh, I wouldn't change it for the world. I really, really wouldn't change it for the world. I mean, I got quite high up as a competing athlete in the natural bodybuilding division, I became British champions and things like that. And I could still go fairly well on that perspective, but obviously with me administering testosterone, it disallows me from obviously competing naturally. But the amount of progress and the amount that my life has changed, there would be no way that I would ever go back and think, right, well, I wouldn't do that because I want to compete naturally. Do you know what I mean? I mean, even my whole outlook on life, it's almost like the only way that I can see it, or a way that I can describe it, apart from like the whole existing thing. Imagine before you got a new pair of glasses where you could see things. So if you wander around in a haze and then all of a sudden you put your glasses on and you can see the detail in the leaves and the birds that fly high, that is basically the clarity that you get from being on HRT and having hormones. And the emotion that you get from it is astronomical, because it's just like, Jesus Christ, you get passionate about it. And it's like, this is what living is all about. I didn't understand this. So I am very passionate about it, and I do take care of all of my athletes' hormones. It's like I spoke to actually one of my clients today, and she was saying, I'm bloated and my water is just being held around here. I was like, well, whereabouts are you in your cycle? She said, I haven't had one in 2 months. I'm like, dude, what? Why the fuck have you not told me this? You cannot keep these things to yourself. You are in a prep and you are 6 weeks out. If you are going to lose your menstrual cycle, you miss one, you fucking tell me. Because it's not something that we play with, especially as naturals and that, in her last prep, we actually managed to retain her menstrual cycle all the way through her prep, and she got lean as fuck.
It's fucking impressive.
Yeah, we managed to keep it, and she was really good.
I have a girl competing. Fuck, she's like a week out now. Same thing. She's like, she got her menstrual cycle like a week or two ago. She's like, how the fuck do I still have this? Like, happens,
Again, some people respond just like you were talking about the individual differences in terms of. Sorry, my dog going crazy there. It's okay,
we're about to add a third dog to the list, so you're good. I completely understand your.
Yeah. Everyone's used to like my monster barking at the moment, so he's gonna go in there in a minute.
I'm like 5 weeks out of getting a new puppy, so I completely understand.
But the problem is that this guy is not a puppy. He's 9. It's like, what date is it? It's the 22nd. I think he's 9 today. So
hey.
Yeah, he's 9 today. I think he's 9 today.
Happy freaking birthday.
I know, right? You noisy bugger.
Get him. Okay.
Hey, shut up. Thank you. Just an old grumpy sod. But anyway, I've forgotten what we were saying now because of the dog.
We were just discussing like the emotional capacity coming back for HRT and how it's like, it's not only going to positively affect like the physical outcomes as far as physique development, but it's also going to just like everyday life, right? Just your emotional attachment to individuals, to events and everything.
Into individuality. That's what we're talking about, and periods and stuff like that, right? See, I've got prep brain because I'm 2 days out. So the tables have turned, Luke. Right. So it's the individual differences. So I suppose we can relate that back as well. So some people will keep their menstrual cycles, other people can't. We managed to actually bring, I'm sure she won't mind me mentioning her name, but we managed to bring Ali's menstrual cycle very, very well, because we stopped putting her into such a deficit all the way through prep. So we kind of had a rotational basis where she was having 5 low days and then 2 back-to-back refeeds, where I brought her up to maintenance, and that almost stabilized her. So her body just kind of thought that food was now omnipresent and it didn't have to be in starvation, and it wasn't going to have to shut down that reproductive cycle. She had an off season where basically it wasn't as productive as it could have been. So when we came back, she actually had a lot more body fat to lose. As a bikini athlete, she just went too high, too far and above, and it was just unfortunate that at that point, you know, she was carrying that. So if I don't know if you've experienced it as well, but from an off season where you have a not so productive off season where you're carrying a bit too much more body fat, you almost have to come lower in your secondary prep in order to get the condition that you need. And that's where we're finding her at the moment. So even though we are doing that ratio, she has experienced a menstrual cycle drop off for 2 cycles at the moment. So that's obviously what we're trying to fight back now.
Yeah, and that's typically common. Prep's always going to be rougher when that happens, and it's just more net stress and fatigue on the body. And then the body gets fatigued and stressed, it's going to shut down the things that it thinks are non-essential. And I hate to break it to you, but reproducing when you're in a state of starvation is not a priority, right? So
no.
Yeah, typically you see like the harder the prep is, the quicker that goes, and having an off season where it doesn't appropriately set up because of, you know, either they took it too far or it just wasn't consistent or it didn't try to drive like the variables up to like the best place they could be with like the food relative to body composition type ratio. Yeah, you'll typically see it happen a little bit faster, but again, very inter-individual, right? It's just going to depend. I think one of the things kind of left out of the conversation was growth hormone usage.
Oh yeah.
Which I did want to touch on just real quick within today, because I think there is a very, very misunderstood relationship with growth hormone within PED usage. I don't know if you'd want to touch on that real quick.
Definitely, yeah. It's
I
very
think,
popular at the moment, actually, growth hormone.
yeah, it is. I think that it should be. And I think that it's one of those things that we can utilize within stack design advancements that should be used a little bit quicker than like the original thought process. And, oh, well, like I'm not at that level yet, I don't need to use growth hormone. It's like, well, no, like we can stimulate hypertrophy via the growth hormone IGF-1 axis and use that as a tool to not have to elevate the total androgen load of the stack design in order to create a result. But typically what we see is that it's going to be more useful on the male side than the female side. So just with basic understanding of like growth hormone to IGF-1 axis is going to be the sexual differences between conversion. And so males obviously have a higher proclivity to convert growth hormone and IGF-1 and utilize that for hypertrophy-based adaptations.
Yeah.
One of the biggest things in that is that typically the gold standard usage, the gold standard compound and usage alongside growth hormone is going to be testosterone.
Yeah.
Because of the estradiol component of the aromatization into estradiol and the elevation of the estradiol above normal physiology. And so this is where I swear to God, I've come across people who have been told to do growth hormone only cycles. And I'm like, you are throwing your fucking money away. Like,
yeah, because growth is expensive, man.
It's fucking expensive to be doing shit like that.
Yeah.
So it does require that hormonal elevation in order for us to see like the net benefit in things along those lines. And so like the gold standard compound that's used with that is test, because we get both the net hormonal environment elevation in test and estradiol alongside the growth hormone usage. And there's going to be large benefits in, as long as the administration protocol follows elevation in local, not systemic IGF-1, then you're going to see large local elevations of IGF-1 and a net positive result in hypertrophy-based outcomes.
Yeah.
And so with females, like not only is the conversion lower, but what's the first AI that's used with females 10 times out of 10? And it's going to be Nolvadex, right?
Yeah.
Nolvadex combats growth hormone IGF-1 mediated adaptations to hypertrophy at the highest rate out of all of the SERM/AIs, right, that are used within our culture, right? So it's like, okay, first off, you know, we're at a kind of a disadvantaged state as a female. Second off, we're not using test as a hormonal elevation. Third off, this coach is deciding to use Nolvadex alongside growth hormone, and now we're further mitigating the beneficiary things of growth hormone usage. So I think it just comes down to, I'm not saying that growth hormone usage within female physique development is not warranted in some certain situations, especially in the larger classes.
Mm.
I think it's maybe having the better understanding that on the males, male side, it should be considered a lot earlier, because we're going to see net health outcomes over the long term for equal physique development progress be a lot better. And for me, like 10 times out of 10, as long as someone can financially afford that, like that's the route I'm going. Like better health outcomes, equated physique development progress, like it's like a no-brainer. And then I think that one of the things too we should start to realize is usage of things like metformin and telmisartan
Yeah.
should be standard. Like, and that's a whole other conversation for all of the benefits within those. But there's a reason that in progressive medicine, those things are being used as staples. So just some side commentary. Like I do think that growth hormone has a vector of progress that people don't consider,
Mm.
and should be considered a lot earlier on, so that net total stack load or androgen load or whatever you want to call it, net milligram load for the individual is not getting elevated that high.
Yeah, definitely. Because growth hormone, realistically, we all have our own natural derivatives of growth hormone. And this is what people kind of like associate or tend to forget. You know, we can just elevate our own natural stores. And that's exactly what we're doing with testosterone with men anyway. You've got natural levels of testosterone. And if you add in more testosterone, you're just going to have more of a bioidentical hormone. It's just going to be synthetic at the end of the day. And growth is going to do the same thing. Now, one of the things that I will have a separate conversation with you actually about this off air, because I think it's really interesting and I don't want to kind of give people the wrong impression. So we'll do that afterwards. But some of the side effects that you can get from growth, which I found really interesting, was carpal tunnel. So it's a funny one, isn't it? Because it's just like, well, this is something that's supposed to be elevating and be rejuvenating and help with joint pain and that kind of thing. But one of the side effects is inflammatory problems of your joints. So have you ever come across that with any one of, well, not maybe even one of your clients, but stories that you've heard because of it?
Oh yeah, I mean, there's a reason people call it like growth hands. Like you go to swing, and it's like you're kind of closing your hand. You're like, oh fuck, I can't bend my fingers all the way down to a fist, like without some resistance, right? No, yeah, I mean that's stereotypical, but the amount that happens is relative to the individual and typically relative to the dose. And then like your considerations are going to be for other net side effects. It's going to be it increases T4 to T3 conversion, so you will see an elevation in the thyroid, and then some fluid retention, so an influence on like the renin system overall. So as your like main considerations for side effects. But yeah, no, I mean that's definitely 101, like something that can happen. But again, inter-individual devil in the dose type of a thing, you know. So I mean, I don't mind if my hands get a little stiff with growth. I don't really care. If they've got so much muscle from gripping shit on it anyways, it's going to be a little stiff whether I have growth in or not. Might as well have just be like, no, but like it is a consideration, especially if you're dealing with people who already are like dealing with carpal tunnel based issues or you know, major arthritis based, and you know, maybe understanding that, hey, you know, this could cause some problems, but you know, it doesn't mean you can't find out whether it improves symptomology or not.
Definitely. Yeah. And I think it also comes down to things like they may be suffering with, so possibly an underlying disease. So like an immunity problem or something like that, that has something to be really considerative of. And then of course, you've got to be wary or understanding of your blood glucose elevation, because of growth hormone can impair your insulin sensitivity. So again, blood glucose is going to be monitored quite closely with that one. So a lot of people pair growth hormone with insulin or metformin, depending on the dose. I mean, I'm a bit funny about the whole insulin argument to go alongside it, because realistically, if you are going to be gauging things properly, your insulin resistance shouldn't be compromised that much, independent of the amount of growth that you're going to be taking.
I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with a basal insulin,
No?
No, I mean, it's just going to help you manage blood glucose parameters. And there is a synergistic effect to using insulin with growth hormone, right?
Yeah.
So typical refractory period for growth hormone administration is like 4 to 6 hours. I believe it's closer to the 4. And so we can use insulin to reset, sensitivity to some of those growth hormone pathways. JAK-STAT5 is typically the one that's like initially cited when we talk about growth hormone pathways. There's a couple that we would be considering. So using insulin in order to not only manage blood glucose for health parameters, but also be able to resensitize pathways is a very beneficial thing. It's why we, as bodybuilders, we eat multiple times a day, yet we take our growth hormone doses away from eating, is because of that refractory period, right? Because we want to initiate the result. So no, I mean, I think the method within usage and the elevation within insulin usage is the problem. It's not the presence of insulin, but just because of that synergistic effect we're going to see with growth hormone. And so it is very beneficial. Now, can you do what you need to do with the metformin? Yeah, for a lot of people you can. So, and people have a bad association with insulin in the first place. So then you get this like anxiety elevation that drives so much anxiety that they like pass out or whatever it may be. And it's like the net outcomes are worse because they're driving so much anxiety with the insulin in play. So it's like, okay, maybe in that situation, we just use metformin, right?
Yeah.
No, I don't think there's anything wrong with insulin usage, especially from the basal side. I do think you have to be, obviously, like you have to be really careful with like the rapids, like Nova Rapids, logs, human logs. But I do think that they have a place as well for the larger classes. Like they can be beneficial. I just think, again, the amount and the frequency. It's like if you're having to use it every single day and you're using it for 8 or 9 weeks, it's like, let's not do that. Like, let's take it and use it for, as needed basis when we need to use it to shuttle food a little bit more. I'll be real. Insulin's one of the most anabolic hormones in the body if you use it correctly. So don't have problems in the usage. I have problems in the misusage.
Yeah, that's a better way of saying it, actually. Yeah, so that is not a problem in actually using it. It's how you misuse it that it causes your problems.
And 9 times 10 bodybuilders misuse it. So.
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly.
More is better.
And
more is better.
This is the whole reason why we do these podcasts, right? And why we have these conversations. It's to try and bring more education into the industry, because unfortunately, there's so many bros who did the things back in the bro day, but we're actually quite bloody dangerous. So it's trying to bring more knowledge and more science, but with that anecdotal element at the same time to bring this coaching and bring this industry a little bit more elevated. I'm passionate about being a bloody good communicative coach. And I think that's what's lost a lot in the industry these days, where coaches take on too many clients, they lose their communication, they lose their service level, and then this is when your problems arise when it comes down to PED usage.
Yep, 100% agree. 100% agree. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and claim that I'm an organic chemist, but I've done my work in order to be a much better coach and proficient at handling health. So
absolutely,
at the end of the day, that's kind of what we should be striving to do. So yeah, I think this has been a fantastic conversation. I think it's a conversation that needs to be had more often. Sure. Did you have any like listeners' questions that you wanted to touch on or anything for today?
Oh, I did, but we've been talking for like an hour, so I don't want to take up. I know time flies. So I don't want to take up too much more of your time. But we will definitely have another episode. I'd like to kind of get you on a frequent basis, obviously, with schedule permitting and things like that, because people love these conversations. I love these conversations. So from a selfish perspective, I'll just have you on.
Right. I'm always down to have a conversation that's productive and gives back ultimately, right? Because that's the whole reason we do that is to kind of further the industry standard and get people thinking in ways that are a little bit more critical and allow the industry to continue to move forward, and we elevate the standard. And so I'm always down for conversations like this. So whenever you want to schedule one, I'm free. I'll make it happen.
Awesome. So guys, that is it from myself and Luke. As per usual, I'll put in all of the details and Luke's details. Remember that Luke does have his own podcast as well, which is No Switch Fitness. So please go and listen to those. He's had some epic episodes on recently. So please go and do those. If you've got any questions, I'm sorry I didn't get over to the questions that you sent in for this time, but I will send them over to Luke, and then we can maybe do some Instagram stories or something like that and get over from them. Until next time, thank you once again for joining in. Like, share, subscribe, do all of the things and all of the tags, and much loves until the next episode.